Hello and welcome to England Cricket on 99.94. Cricket every day. I'm Daniel Norcross, recently returned from Australia, where I have been commentating on England's extraordinary victory in the World T20 for the BBC. And I am, as always, joined by the chief cricket writer of the Press Association, the puff pastry hangman himself, slightly hungover after a night on the lash. It's
recently returned from Derby. It's a little bit different to your travels, a little bit closer to home, but full of the joys of life and an acerbic view on all things cricket, I'm sure, if and when we can think of what we want to say about it.
Well, do you know, I mean, a lot of people don't have many good words to say about Derby, and what I would say is that it's a damn sight better than Canberra. Well, so, stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
I like Derby, for the record.
Anyway, England cricket.
It's land of hope and dreams.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah. We'll delve into that on another day, perhaps. Yes, on Fantasy Sunday. England Cricket on 99.94 is your new home for England cricket content, and we will be dropping into your podcast feed and on YouTube or the 99.94 app several times every week. So please do rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. Today, we are going to look at the first two games in what some people have been saying is the single most pointless three-match one-day international series ever devised by man or beast. Pointless maybe, but is it pointless if you're Dawid Malan, if you're David Willey, if you're any of those fringe players, Liam Dawson, trying to knock on the door before a World Cup? That is what we will look at in our second part. And then finally, we've got some bits of information or news really to give you from the world of England women's cricket with the announcement of a new coach and a whole new draft for the 100. We'll be delving into that in some detail in our third part. But first of all, let us break down the premise, Rory Dollard. How pointless is this one-day international series? So firstly, let me put it into a little bit of context. The World Cup final at the MCG, played against Pakistan in a fervid and remarkable atmosphere in front of over 80,000 people, was played out on Sunday, is that the 13th of November? I think it was. It's only a week ago today that I was there watching it and marvelling, spine-tingling atmosphere that it was as England became the first side in the history of white ball cricket to be both world champions in the 50-over format and in the T20 format. People have talked a lot about this, and there were drunken revelries into the night as we discussed where Jos Buttler and Ben Stokes would sit in the pantheon of great English cricketers from W.G. Grace through C.B. Fry and Wally Hammond, Jos Buttler, Ben Stokes, all this conferred on them. Something like that. It was just a week ago. And then 3 days later, I had already left. My dear colleagues Henry Moran, Alex Hartley and their producer Adam Mountford trooped off dutifully to Adelaide to watch the first one-day international, and England put out
a team.
Was it a B team? Was it a C team?
They fulfilled the fixture.
It was a team. It was a team of 11 English qualified players, and they were playing against really rather strong Australian side that was pretty much their A team. So, look, put it into context for us, Rory. Pointless? Is it just fulfilling of fixtures? Or is it actually very important warm-up matches for Australia and for England when not much 50-over cricket is played and there's a World Cup not that far away?
Well, I will try. If you would say to me, put this one-day series in context, my first answer would be, what one-day series? It's not cracking the surface, is it? It just isn't. It's a non-event, unfortunately. The fans aren't turning up. They've been bled dry from the fixture list and having a World Cup and a big busy schedule coming up, and this is absolutely lowest on the totem pole. Bear in mind, we already had a white ball bilateral series between England and Australia before the T20 World Cup. We did this already. We reignited the famous rivalry already, and it was fine. But this it's just rubbish. It doesn't need to happen. It's just like the World Cup 19. Which we kind of forget that they rolled those lads out, half of them anyway, to play a test match at Lords against Ireland 5 minutes after they'd celebrated the World Cup and almost made a balls of it. And almost, I mean, this seems worse in a way because I don't know about you, I've never heard such overt disinterest from the players. Moeen Ali says it's horrible. Yeah. Moeen Ali, who is wouldn't even have had a hangover, and half of them would. But he said it's horrible scheduling. Even Mitch Stark, who didn't go as deep as some of the England lads, was saying it was a silly schedule. Didn't Butler say, well, his first reaction to losing game 1 was, so what? That he didn't play game 2. Yeah. It does nothing for the product. I don't want to be really crassly commercial about it, but England-Australia is something. It matters in cricket, and it has to matter, or there isn't anything. We don't have international cricket if that doesn't matter. And they're diluting it and making it seem banal and run-of-the-mill. And this series, I don't know anybody. Honestly, I don't know anybody who's watching it. People don't know it's happening.
Well, I will say that I did watch it because I had terrible jet lag. So I woke up at about 3:15 in the morning and I couldn't get back to sleep. And I paced around and then I went, oh, there's a cricket match on. Then I turned it on and I saw that, neither side... Well, the Australians, I think, did see the opportunity of getting a couple of easy wins over England by putting out a very strong side. But England didn't. And I don't know whether I'm slightly disappointed by that or I find it completely understandable because, that T20, World T20, was quite an intense experience. And you've already alluded to the fact that England played 3 warm-up games against Australia. They played 7 warm-up games against Pakistan. So they were going into that tournament on the back of actually 11 games because there was that other crazy fixture against Pakistan in Brisbane, don't forget. So they'd had 11 of these games and then the real business started.
And then they were right into knockout mode almost after that Ireland game. They were into intense knockout mode from that point onwards.
Exactly. Well, exactly, because rain had been in the air and because New Zealand had thrashed Australia, that meant that net run rate was always going to favour New Zealand so much so that they were kind of over the hills and far away. So suddenly, England really had to win all but one of their games, messed one of them up badly. And so the pressure, when you've flown basically to the other side of the world and you've failed to win under Owen Morgan and you're Joss Butler and Matthew Mott, and you've got all that going on and you've got the scrutiny of it. They didn't have a great summer, don't forget, in England. And then to come out on top in front of a massive crowd. I mean, just to reiterate, the crowds in Australia for most of the tournament were deeply disappointing, but whenever India was playing or Pakistan was playing, the atmosphere was intense. And they get home in that final, and it shouldn't be about, having a hangover because they're professional sports people. And you can celebrate, there are ways of doing these things without getting completely obliterated. But you've got to have a little bit of time to reflect on what you've done and all of the mental and physical energy that goes into doing that. And what would it have been? I imagine they'd have got Monday off because that was a reserve day. Tuesday they travelled. That's when my TMS team went. They travelled on Tuesday to have a day in Adelaide Wednesday before the game on Thursday. I mean, that is, as you say, diluting the product. I would say, though, Rory, that this is not new. What was the year England played 7 one-day internationals against Australia? 7.
I know. But listen, I want to make the point as well. It's not as though, people would get angry if they thought that England were going out wearing the shirt, and swinging the lead, tossing it off. It's not that. It isn't that. It's the fact that when 2 elite teams like that go up against in a game of T20 where the margins are pretty fine, what settles it? Do you have to be 5% off your game and then that's it? You're out of it? Probably 5. It's that kind of number. And in for whatever reason, no lack of professionalism. If you've just scaled the mountain and won a World Cup and got to the end of a journey, a very clear, fixed end point, you are going to be at the end of that partially checked out. You're not as keenly focused, and to be playing again 4 days later, you're going to be at least 5-10% down on intensity. And in a game of cricket, England versus Australia, that'll do you every time. That'll sort the result out. So it's not particular. I mean, did anybody expect England to win? Nobody did. And thus they haven't. They've lost 2 games. They haven't been massively competitive and don't appear. Now, again, not saying this is unprofessional, but it's not ripping their heart and soul out, to be honest. Nor should it.
No, it isn't. We're going to drill down very shortly into those games, though, because whilst you say England haven't been competitive, they have at moments been competitive, and there have, for some people, been some potential, not career-saving, but career-enhancing performances that may see them work their way into that first team, because there is, after all, as we keep on saying, a one-day international World Cup coming up in less than 12 months' time. So we'll have a short break, and when we come back, we will discuss exactly that.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Welcome back. So it's pointless. It's utterly ridiculous. It's futile. There's no need for it. Nobody's watching it. Try telling that to BT, because bless them, they bought the rights and they're paying people to go and sit in the studio in the middle of the night. Steve Harmison's managing to get excited. Stows with Matt Pryor. And I tell you, if they were paying me, I would be thrilled at the prospect of another one-day international between England and Australia. But they're not.
Come and get me, plea from Norcross.
The cynic in me is able to... Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not averse to that at all. Anybody out there who wants to come and get me, please do come and get me. But whilst we've been cynical about this, let's take a look at some of the performances in these matches. Now, at Adelaide, yes, England were soundly beaten by 6 wickets with 3.1 overs to spare. But having really looked entirely uncompetitive for the first 25 overs, Dawid Malan produced a magnificent innings of 134. Throughout the innings, England maintained a run rate in excess of 5 and over. They still had that kind of aggressive way in which they were playing. It could have looked slapdash. It could have looked like, well, they didn't care. But I think actually it is the game plan that England want to use. And they made 287. It's a shirt front to Adelaide, as England knew, but India didn't, to their cost, in the World Cup semi-final of the T20. So actually competitive total on that pitch with England's second string bowling was probably nearer 350. But that was a terrific knock from Dawid Malan. And Dawid Malan, I want you to talk to me about Dawid Malan, because you've toured around him. I did in 2017-18. He's seen as a kind of Australia specialist. He was taken out there again last year, 21-22. Started the series well and then went into a bit of a nosedive. But when he plays the way he did in that first one-day international, such dreamy cover drives, sudden, it's like a slog waft sweep from Pat Cummins came out of nowhere, nicely, planted into the stands for 6. He pulls nicely. He does pull nicely. Dawid Malan, is he going to cement a place in the 50-over side? Because he's always seems to be a kind of person that all England fans, and to a degree, the selectors go, well, yeah, let's put him in. Let's see. But he doesn't let him down very often. No, he doesn't. Does he?
I like Malan, actually. And I think he's quietly put together quite a nice little England career. And he's never felt absolutely permanent in any of the teams, really. And then you just a quick one on the Ashes. You're like, his form in the Ashes did drop off. But he was England's second best player after Root when the series was alive. He was there in the really gritty moments when the thing was still active and alive and up for grabs. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. Does he cement his place in the ODI team? I think it's hard. I think it's hard to get him and Root in at 3 and 4, where they'd probably have to be 3 and 4. I think we're back to our favourite double entendre of 2 wankers. To I probably went a bit too far. Two anchors of Milan and Stokes in the T20 team. I think Milan might have to be the alternate route. If route isn't.
Can you not in 50 over cricket? Can you not just possibly cope with another anchor, especially one that's going at a strike rate of about 85 to 90, which he can do. And I mean, in that innings, he's got great acceleration as well. I just do wonder that the way England play white ball cricket is marvellously aggressive, but they do lose wickets in doing so quite frequently, as they did again in the second game. So actually, two anchors at 3 and 4, but they're not slow scoring anchors. To get you through those overs up to 35.
They are both people who bat through, though. There's a chance that both, because Milan is quite tunnel vision, and Root sets his. Oh, how nice mug! Root sets his course for the end of the game and lets people bat around him. So you could find yourself with a bit of unused artillery with those two. I think Milan probably is the alternate to Root, if I'm honest. But a really decent cricketer, competitive, and has actually scrapped for what he's got with England. He hasn't had it easy, I don't think, and he hasn't been. Don't think he's ever been one of the obvious lads who they like to pick just for the sake of picking him. He's had to work for it. So it's interesting actually that we say the series is pointless. It's interesting that he comes up with the big performance of the first two games because he misses out on that final and the semi-final, and he gave that interview to the guys out there saying that he shed a tear and he thought he'd done enough to prove his fitness. So within a pointless fixture, there are things to fight for, and he certainly obviously felt like there was a bit to fight for. We've got other people. Billings is around. Dawson, you mentioned. Luke Wood made his debut. Now, do I think anything that happens in this series is going to really advance anyone's case for a World Cup in India at the back end of next year? No, I don't. I think it's a bit of an island. I think it's existing on its own sort of frame of reference, this thing. I think they'll go to the big names. There's not actually that many ODIs, is there, between now and the World Cup? So I'm not sure there's much to fight for, really. I think the pecking order is about where it's at the moment. And I think...
How about let me put one thing to you, though. One thing that in the second game at Sydney, the bowlers restricted Australia to 280 odd. And there was a point in that run chase, despite having lost two very quick wickets, none for two, weren't they? When Billings and Vince looked like they were taking control of the game. And if they get England over the line in a game like that, in a live rubber, they didn't as it happened, but they both put in tidy performances. Both got half centuries. Had they got over the line, does that just say to the selectors, they've got to be part of the rotation as we look to what England's one-day side is? Because don't forget that there's no Ben Stokes. So if you take Ben Stokes out of the equation, and he is kind of an anchor actually in one-day cricket, which is partly why I wondered if that does open a door for Milan, but it certainly might open a door for someone like Vince or for Billings as well. And similarly, because I'm asking two questions at once, because this is just before we go to our next break, what does this do for Jason Roy?
Yeah.
Because if anything, might this series be a way of actually going, right, well, you've been given another chance in there and it's not happening. Alex Hales, in you come to the 50 over team as well.
Roy, that is absolutely correct. Roy has had a real nosedive. It's gone really quite badly wrong for him. He loses his place in the T20 setup right at the minute you don't want to, and he's been watching his mates lift a World Cup, so he's not in a great spot. Rob Key says when he picks that squad, nothing to fear for Jason Roy, because actually we think 50 overs is best format. Pumps his tyres up, and then Roy goes and gets bombed out twice. So he could do the third game is a big one for him, because he needs to show some signs of trending upwards so that he can get out of this funk. Now, England aren't going to be short of offers for opening bats. It's something where they're pretty well stocked. Bairstow comes back for a start, and he's just an absolute gun in 50 over cricket, so we should consider him a lock. But would it be would it be crazy or would it be a waste to consider Butler to open in 50 overs? Would that be a waste of his finishing talents? Because really, he can bat through it. And if I like the idea in 20 over cricket of let Josh Butler face as many balls and as many overs as he can. And I'm not entirely convinced I hate that logic in 50 overs.
I agree with you entirely, actually. Partly because, as you know, I've got something of a pash for old Joss. And I've always wanted there to be the day, and I believe it could happen, when he could open the batting in a 50-over match and be there at the end of that. And
be on 250.
If he's there for 50 overs, he gets a double 100.
Exactly.
He gets a double 100 because he's not batting for 50 overs and getting less than a double 100.
I just look at it, and I know that there's nuances that I am probably not across and not up to speed with. I'm sure there always are. But I look at Josh Butler and I think, I really like Josh Butler in a 10-over power play. I'd like, he's going to hit, when he hits the gaps, they're going to go. He actually is a guy who increasingly can stay around. And he's not just a 30 off 15 balls guy. He can, he makes chunky scores. And he's got a good range of scoring. And I just think, I don't know, why don't we want this guy to just bat as long as possible in every single game? And I think without the test cricket being in his mind now, and we can fairly well shut the door on that, don't know why he wouldn't want that challenge, really. And there was times in this T20 World Cup where Butler, he won the toss against, was it Sri Lanka? One of the games he just decided he won the toss and he just wanted to get out and bat because he wanted to dictate the game and control the narrative. Just do that. I think there's a chance. I think Butler might have a better chance than Hales. I could be wrong, but I don't know that Hales for 50 overs is really going to happen.
Despite the fact that he holds the highest individual score for England in one day in South Africa.
He's not done a lot of it recently, though.
No one's done a lot of it recently because no one gets to play it. So, I mean, that's the other thing we're watching is a bunch of T20 cricketers being told you've got to stand out there for 2.5 times as long, which is quite the mindset. It's time for us to take our final break. After that, we're going to update you with some news from the England women's setup.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
So, England's women have, as often happens, been rather overlooked. They don't play, obviously, as many games as England's men. I say obviously, there's no reason why they shouldn't play as many games as England's men, but they haven't for a little while played, and they're going off to tour in the West Indies shortly, a tour that has only recently had their fixtures confirmed, one that is going to be virtually invisible and virtually inaudible, which is, in its own way, an absolute scandal. I can't tell you how much that angers me, but it does, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. But they have been, for some time now, been in search of a new coach. Lisa Keightley, having decided that she'd had enough. She'd stewarded the England team through an incredibly difficult time through COVID, through the Ashes, through a Women's T20 World Cup, through a Women's 50 over World Cup. England didn't quite have the success that they would have liked, perhaps, under Keightley, but there were circumstances that made it more difficult. Just of late, they've been without their captain, Heather Knight. They've been without Nat Siver and Catherine Brunt. Hopefully all those wrinkles are about to be ironed out, and they have announced a new coach, and it is Jon Lewis. What do we make of that? Jon Lewis, a man who looks remarkably like Richard II. He's got a fantastically sort of 13th century visage to him, but I'm hoping he's going to bring 21st century coaching.
That was one of the key components they were looking for, a passing resemblance to a monarch. So he did check that. I think it's an
Plantagenet king.
I think it's an interesting appointment, actually. He is a guy who has been very ECB. He had a bit of time at Sussex, obviously. He took the Young Lions to a World Cup, the under-19s. Pretty well, good job there, I think. I think he was pretty well thought of. Joined the setup under Silverwood he became Silverwood's bowling coach because that was the position Silverwood had previously held before he was head coach. toured around with the team. He was there in the Ashes, just gone. Which probably didn't mention in the interview, did he? Probably didn't bring that up. And he'd actually just not long ago he'd been sort of eased into a bit of a sideways stroke, slightly down moving, sort of a wider developmental brief, and probably looking at doing a bit of Loughborough work. So not surprised that he was looking. But a really interesting appointment. I think it's good. I think it's good that he's English. Sorry to be all boring about this, but it would have been disappointing to me if they'd have gone for another Aussie. It's the first coaching appointment England have made for a while that isn't an Australian, so that's good. And we gather Ashley Nofke was sort of in the hunt for it. But Lewis will have, so his specialism is his pace bowling coach. And he was the Jofra whisperer. He was really, it's a bit reductive to say, but it feels like he got that England coaching job because he was exceptionally close to Jofra Jofra lived with him in Hove for a bit when he moved over to Sussex. Had a very good relationship with him. And England's great unsolved mystery at that time was, how do we get the best out of Jofra Archer in Test cricket? Now, for almost the entirety of his spell in charge of the fast bowlers, he didn't have Jofra Archer. He was injured, so we didn't quite get to scratch the surface of what that meant. But one thing Lisa Kitely did was freshen up the seam bowling outlook with Lauren Bell, with Freya Kemp, Freya Davis, Izzy Wong. So what they've got is a little battery of bowlers there who maybe could really, really, really benefit from Jon Lewis's specialism. And it would be a really nice thing if England could get a incisive, sort of super skilled fast bowling attack, because their spin options are good. And they've got a young set of fast bowlers that Jon Lewis can get stuck into. So I think that's really a positive thing. One thing I would say about Jon Lewis, I think he needs to potentially think about how he presents in public. He wasn't the best in media engagements, and that isn't the be all and end all. I realise that, but he was defensive and guarded and a bit snippy. He didn't like being asked if England had a bad day if they got bowled out for 80, and sometimes you just got to wear it. And I think if he's in the head coach's job, he needs to be a bit more open and engaged with that process. But if that's the only black mark against him, I think a pretty strong appointment.
Yeah, I concur. I think it's exciting times for women's cricket in England. I think they've got a lot of good young players coming through. The team is being freshened up at a speed faster than I have ever seen. One of my biggest criticisms of the English women's setup has been that it's been a little bit of a closed shop for a little bit too long, but that's been a function of the lack of professionals. And the last thing I want us to have a quick look at is, we've already discussed that there are more women professionals coming through in England than ever before next year. And with professionalism comes gimmickry. And the 100 has announced it's going to have a draft. Now, young people love drafts, and I have to say that I'm not young anymore. They get very excited. They stay up till the middle of the night, imagining who might be picked for whom. And I get it. It's a bit like, swapping cards in the playground and creating fantasy teams and all that. I don't have time for it. It's a bit of pizzazz, it's a bit of razzmatazz, and it's entirely in keeping with 100. I'm not opposed to it, but Rory, can you explain how it's working? Because the only takeaway I had was that each team retains 4 players, and that seems like a very small number to me.
I'm strongly against it. I think any of the gains that they've made in the 100, and specifically the women's 100, are compromised by blowing up their squads and reassigning players. It's my least favourite thing about all these franchise tournaments, when they go, oh, this is the year when we're going to just throw all the cards up in the air and
the mega auction.
Everyone, all the people where you'd got used to thinking that so-and-so played for this team, turns out not anymore. So listen, this year in the 100, or next year rather, the teams are going to have 4 retained players, guaranteed retained players from their current squads. Within that, they can then, which again, this is absolute, I hate even talking about this gobbledygook. I don't know why they do it. They've got a right to match card. Now, that's lifted directly over from the IPL. So what it means is you can tell someone they're ditched, and then when somebody else wants them, you can go, no, we're going to have them actually. We're going to have them back. You can take someone back. But why? It's like, I don't know. Why would you go back
Why?
if you got dumped by your girlfriend, and then the only time she wanted to drop you a message was when somebody else was inviting you out for a drink? I'm not sure you'd be that keen. So they got that. The 100 organisers say that they anticipate plenty more retentions, and that once the retentions are named, and there's a draft system where you pick up another 4 players in the draft, and presumably that's where the 5th best member of your squad is going to end up somewhere else, because that's the players who are going to be available. And they expect plenty more retentions within the open market, because the squads are going to be filled up with just private negotiation, as they were in the women's edition for the last couple of years. But it doesn't strike me well. I think the one thing the 100 desperately needs is identity and continuity and narrative. Right. And what you've got is a team who've won the thing twice under actually Jonathan Batty, who maybe was another strong candidate for the women's job, by the way. You've got a team who won the thing twice, and they're going to say, right, you can have 4 of them, and everyone else can just pilfer off the best of them. And I don't know why. I do not know why they should be punished for putting together the best team.
Well, that was my initial thought, which is that the Oval Invincibles have created an identity. Conversely, actually, the Welsh Fire created an identity. One of
they'll get
one of perpetual.
And so they'll
loss,
get first pick in the draft. That's their reward for being garbage. I don't get it. I don't like it. It's a bit of a misstep, exactly. I think. This
and the Oval Invincibles are actually a side that in women's cricket terms in England, the people who like women's cricket can name the Oval Invincibles team. And from next season, they won't be able to name them because there might only be 4 of them who are the same, which would be really, really confusing. Oh, Donny van Niekerk. No, she's not at the Oval Invincibles anymore. She's at the Trent Rockets. How come? I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it irks me a little bit.
It's artificial and manufactured.
It's artificial.
In a competition that could really do with not having those words thrown at it all the time.
I couldn't agree with you more, because that is the criticism that's thrown at it. So why not give it a chance to bed down and give the teams a chance to have some identity, because they are getting there, and especially in the women's game, which is an area of the 100 that is definitely not broken. It's time for us to say goodbye. We will be back after the final pointless ODI between England and Australia
to 25 on
chew a bit of cud over that. Yeah, well, we might. But we'll also, at that point, be looking forward to the England Test Series, which begins in Pakistan in next to no time. There's a warm-up game happening in the UAE on the 23rd of November, which is about 4 days away. It's that crazy. And it's also why absolutely none of their players, if you were wondering, none of those Test players are playing in the ODI squad. Anyway, thank you for listening to England Cricket on 99.94, where we speak cricket every day. Please do rate, review, and subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcast. You can download the 99.94 app and follow us on Twitter at, in my case, Norcross Cricket, and in Rory's case, at
the RVD. Not on Mastodon. Can't be bothered.
No, I haven't got onto that yet. I'm just going to wait and see how it goes. I've only just got into Twitter, to be really honest with you. Never miss out. Join our 24/7 conversation on social media and follow us at 99.94 DM Cricket every day your way.